Hey guys, Jack Spirko here from the Survival Podcast. Yesterday I did my final podcast for a while anyway on the concept of getting out of the cities. I've done a whole series of YouTube videos lately on this subject, and this is going to be my last YouTube video on this subject for a while. We're going to do other things. Maybe we'll talk about some things that have to do with the current unrest, but mostly what we're going to talk about is things that are behind us, the gardens here. And ways that you can feed yourself and be sustainable. I'm a solutions-oriented guy. But I am coming at this entire idea of getting out of the cities as a solution to a problem. Identifying a problem is easy, maybe, for some people. Some people maybe not so easy. A lot of times I think actually people misidentify the problem, and that's why they apply the incorrect solution. But what I've titled this video is to starve the parasite, remove the host. And I thought doing it out here in the gardens instead of in my office would be a good thing, because it's a perfect way to explain this through the permaculture lens. And I'm not going to use words like liberal and conservative today, because this applies equally to you regardless of which side of that dichotomy you choose to associate with. I'm just going to talk about living in a place where people do what you don't want done with your money in the form of taxation. And I'm going to relate that to gardening. I'm going to relate that to all of the productivity that surround me here. I have this one little square here, and I do have a lot of stuff elsewhere, but honestly this one little square here with both protein from the fish and vegetation from the gardens can provide me more food than my wife and I can consume, and enough to feed my grandchildren when they're here, and even my son and my daughter-in-law when they're here from this, right? That doesn't mean it goes without any problems. Occasionally you'll end up, whenever you garden or farm, with a pest. And that pest will take from you. It doesn't produce anything. That's what makes it a pest. I have tremendous numbers of insects here, and the majority of them are not pests. They're productive in some way. Even some of them that might eat a little bit of a plant here and there, as long as they don't overtake, they probably give more than they take. Even if they're an insect that is kind of sort of a pest, but it's not overrunning my garden, my predators need something to eat. If all of the pests are gone, there'll be no predators. So they have a function. I have all kinds of little critters living in the understory here that are decomposers, like pill bugs. We call them roly-polies, right? I've got all this going on, yet occasionally you might have a pest show up that favors a particular plant. There's not enough of a predator in place to keep it down, and it will just keep consuming. And if I plant that plant again this year, it will come back, and there'll be more of them than there were last year. And they will completely destroy that plant. Even if I get a few bits of yield off that plant, my energy input, all the work that I do to grow that plant, will never give me enough back as a gardener to make it worth my time and my effort and the space I've allocated for it to plant that plant. This happens at small garden levels, and it happens at great big farm levels. Let's say you're an old school farmer planting a back 40 in wheat, and you end up with a pest that is a problem for wheat. Well, if you plant that wheat again this year, that pest is coming back in greater numbers than ever before. Now, there's two schools of thought on how to deal with this. One is an ancient proven school of thought. One is a modern school of thought that's done tremendous damage to the environment. Let's start with this second one. It's pesticides. So what we'll do, I know, we'll eradicate the pest. We'll go spray the field with this pesticide, and we will destroy all of the pests. But remember all those beneficial organisms that I talked about? Remember all those other insect allies that I talked about? Even the ones that are kind of sort of pesty, but they're useful to the overall system. They contribute to the overall system. They're not parasites, they're in some way or another producers. Yeah, we'll wipe them out too. And then we'll plant wheat. Well, what does the wheat attract? The very pests that I've tried to get away. Now I've wiped out the predators. Now maybe I have a single good season, but now the predators, or the pests, the parasites come back in droves. And I keep repeating the cycle. And eventually, I end up creating a super class of parasite. I've sprayed so many times that there are some parasites, right? These pests that can survive being sprayed, and they breed and they multiply. And I end up with the problem that modern agriculture has now. Now I need to use a harsher chemical, a harsher pesticide. I have to kill more life. I have to do more destruction to get the same thing done. This is a repetitive cycle, and it leads to destroyed ecosystems. And if we apply this cycle to our cities, to our communities, it will do the same thing. If you try to eradicate the parasite through force, the parasite will increase in its ability to handle and use force of its own, and you will continue a spiraling cycle downward. Okay? Does that make sense? Now, let's take this and compare it to the ancient proven method to deal with this problem in agriculture or horticulture. What we do is we say this place is harboring the young of these parasites. They came, they attacked this year, they ran their cycle, they knew they were going to die, and they laid their eggs. And down in the soil, pupating and waiting to come up in the spring, is their offspring. And they've done that because they're pretty clever, these little insect guys. They knew it was here this year, it'll probably be here next year. So next spring, if I plant the same crop, up they come, and they multiply and they increase and they become fruitful in number, and they destroy more of what I've worked for. But whose fault is it? It's my fault. I've enabled them. I've fed them. I'm the producer. I have literally gone to a store and spent my money. Then I took my time, my talent, my labor, and I came back to that field and I put it down. Maybe I even applied a fertilizer so that it would grow rich and pure in mineral, so that they could consume it, so that they could take it from me. So how do I win that war? Do I just keep putting more and more seed down, more and more fertilizer and more pesticide down? We've seen what that does to a field. It makes it denuded and destroyed and devoid of life, and the pest is still there. Why? Because the producer is still feeding the parasite. See how that works? So the solution, I will not plant the thing the parasite needs this season. That doesn't mean I won't plant wheat anywhere, but I'll go somewhere far away. And it doesn't have to be as far as a geographic move, you know, when we're talking about getting out of a city. But maybe it's a field that's 20 or 30 parcels over, and I'll plant wheat there. And I'll grow a productive crop of wheat there. And in this field over here, maybe I grow a crop like a bean. Doesn't matter what. Just something that pest can't use. And spring comes, and the birds sing, and the ducks quack, and the bees buzz, and up from the ground comes this parasite, this pest. And it goes, Mommy put me here because this is a good place. And it looks around and goes, what the hell? What do I do? It's confused. It's hungry. It's starving. And now come the predators. The predators take it out. And in a season or two, or maybe even 3, depending on the persistency of the pest, I can bring wheat back to that field for a time. It's called crop rotation. It's as ancient as man picking up seed and putting it in the ground. It's proven and it works. This is the same thing that you're doing when you live in a place where what you feel is being done with your tax dollars is wrong and you can't vote your way out of it. And in most places, I don't care which side of that dichotomy you're on, most places of any significant population have been under the control of one side or other of that dichotomy forever and a day. And for the entire, like I said in my earlier videos, for the entire living life of almost anybody watching this video, the mindset that runs Portland has been running Portland because the parasites outnumber the producers in Portland. You can be angry about that, but it's true. And what I'm suggesting is your productivity, your field, is your time, your talent, and your treasure. It's the work you do for an employer or the blood, sweat, and tears that you pour into a business. It is the home that you buy, and whether you rent or you buy, it doesn't matter. You're paying property taxes. This idea that, well, I don't pay property taxes because I'm a renter. I'm a landlord, baby. Who do you think pays my property taxes? You do. You're paying property taxes. You're paying sales taxes. If you look it up in these big cities, you're paying this huge list of taxes. Many are hidden that you don't even see. And all of that is being taken to do things that you don't want done with that money. You can vote for somebody else. You might even take over a council seat or two. And guess what? They're still going to take that money and they're still going to do with your time, your talent, and your treasure that which you abhor. The parasites own the city. You're not taking it back. Not directly. You can't go in and use a pesticide. And if you do, the violence that it creates will harm more of the beneficials than it will harm of the parasites. And eventually you'll create a super parasite. Why? Because we know one thing: patterns repeat in nature. If you see a pattern, it will hold across a broad spectrum of things. We are not immune to patterns, us humans. That's what will happen if you try to use force and violence in that situation where you're dealing with a parasitic organism. You will get a greater number of those parasitic organisms over time with greater resistance and greater use of violence on their own, just like you do in a wheat field. There is no difference. It just takes longer because humans are more adaptable and can think beyond the ability of that pest. But the pattern will hold true. So what do? You rotate your crop. You rotate your crop. You say, hey, where is a field that doesn't have this problem? And you go there and you grow your crop. And what is your crop? Your crop is your time and your talent and your treasure invested to the dreams that you have for your life and your family. That's why you do it. It's not about running away. It's not about being afraid of these people. It's about understanding and reading the pattern and knowing the place that is worthy of your investment. And let's say that you're angry with me. You're all twerked off because you're someone that just listens to me for permaculture stuff, and you think Portland's a great place. You know what? Then my advice stands for you as much as it stands for the person that feels the opposite. Then you should find a place like Portland or Seattle or San Francisco and go there and see if it really works the way you think it works when you don't have the ability to use force and coercion to make people like me provide for you. Maybe you're right. Maybe you're not a parasite. Maybe you're not a pest. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe my people, right? And I'm not on either side of this. I'm a big old scary voluntarist. I'm a big old scary agorist. I believe in all actions between all people being voluntary. I think all of this stuff is wrong. But I can look at it and I can say this side seems to be more of a productive class and this side seems to be more of a parasitic class. Maybe I'm wrong. Then you go to these places. You set up all these social utopia policies, and you do it in the absence of the people who I am talking to right now. And if it works, if you can show me it working, I will come on here and I will say I'm wrong. I'll say, look, it works. And maybe I'll even get the best outcome possible. Look, this works for these people, and this works for these people. Now, if y'all two groups of people would just leave people like me the hell alone, maybe we could all be happy. But that's not the world that we live in right now. So what I'm suggesting is rotate your crop. If you live in one of these flashpoint cities that I've been talking about, and you find what's been done with your tax money, not just this year, but for the past 5 or 6 or 7 or more decades, reprehensible, then vote in the only meaningful way that you can. You know what? The school system never gave a shit when I had parent-teacher conferences. The school system never really gave a shit when I went to a school board meeting. They would say they did, but they didn't care because they didn't change anything. They didn't even get upset about it. They let me say my piece, and they said, we've heard you, and now we're going to, and they don't say this other part, but they say it in their action, in their attitude. Now we're going to go do what we've always done, and you can feel that you vented, and we don't really give a shit what you want. But when we took the boy out of the school, we got their attention. And the reason is that child now represents a dollar sign sitting in that chair. And we took the dollar sign, we took the over $12,000 a year that school got for that boy sitting in that desk, and we said, you don't get that anymore. Now, it's true that they're still taking the money from the taxpayer, but it doesn't go to that school anymore. That school has now had its attention drawn. And this year, millions of parents have done, I'm just suggesting maybe you do that at a macro level. Because you know what? These cities do notice. They do notice when the productive people rotate their crops. And I know what you're thinking. But if I go over here and I build something over here, eventually the pests will come. Good. Glad you noticed that. Because the pattern in nature repeats itself. Of course it will. If you want to know when the place exists that the productive can build independent of the parasitic for eternity and never have the parasitic return and never have to repeat this process, then you don't understand the process. The answer is it will never happen. But it can be 2 or 3 generations. That's usually what it takes to take something like a new place that productive people go to, that they start to build. And it usually takes a population growth beyond about 50,000. So instead of trying to build a new Chicago or a new New York or a new San Francisco, why the hell would you want to do that? We don't have room for 10 new New York cities. We don't have room for 10 new Portlands. And it wouldn't be good for our environment. It wouldn't be good for our society. But we have room for 1,000 new or 10,000 new thriving cities of 10 to 50,000 people. And they are far more resilient against the parasite, because that's the other thing you do. Instead of monocropping in one place, you spread it out. See, our founders had flaws, and our system of governance has flaws, and part of it really was to set up a new aristocracy. But it was also designed to try to give freedom a chance. And our founders knew, and the people that drafted our Constitution knew, that no one would get it 100% right. So they created a system. They created a system where people could move and try it their way, so that over time we would have room for experimentation. Because liberty in human history, once we got civilized, is an experiment. Once we took people and put them in a place and said, you have to stay here now and do things a certain way, giving them any liberty in excess of that is an experiment. We're not sure how it's going to work out. Human beings, for most of our existence, did not live in civilizations. We did not live in groups of 1,000 or 10,000 or 10 million. We lived in groups of 20 to 200. That was the average size of any group of human beings that were sustainable up until the dawn of agriculture and civilization. We were small groups that moved around. And liberty was easy to figure out, because when you screwed it up, you died. And when you created warfare, it cost you dearly, so you stopped doing it. Once we got big, once we started living in a state that's not a natural state for the human being, once we started living that way, any degree of liberty is an experiment. And any degree of the taking of liberty is also an experiment. That's what this great republic is supposed to be. It's big enough and broad enough for everybody. And it allows you to rotate your field. So what happens when you go to a new place and build it and it's invaded by the pests? You do it again. I don't want my grandchildren, I don't care what you want, and neither does the universe. All of this new age babble bullshit that the universe gives you what you want, the universe gives you a wonderful window into what is to be so that you can choose to have what you want, but it doesn't deliver it to you. The universe is built on pattern. Your solar system is built on pattern. Your galaxy is built on pattern. The atoms that make up your body are built on the same pattern. And inside those subatomic particles that we can't even see anything else, and we think it's the smallest piece of matter that there is, the quarks, etc., it's probably yet another pattern and another pattern, and we just can't see it yet till we break down to where energy and matter are the same thing. And if you can't change that, if it's that universal, then you can't change how the pattern works. And so your grandchildren or your great-grandchildren may wake up one day and say, this field is infested. And you should have set a good example for them of what rotating the crop and where the time, the talent, the treasure, and the investment of their life goes, so that they know what to do about it. It's a different way to think about it, but it's a logical way to think about it. And my close here for you today is, the problem we have today is people are thinking too much with emotion and too little with intellect. I understand that the ego drives you to say, I want to fight. I've struggled with that my whole life. I too, like many of you that start shouting at me when I say this stuff, am a former soldier. I served in the United States Army Airborne. I'm an expert rifleman. I can take a human life if I have to. I sure as hell don't want to. And while I'm not the kind of combat veteran that can say, I've seen war, I've been to a lot of places in the world as a soldier where the war had already been there. where the type of civil war that that you're cheering on has happened, and probably so have you. And I'd rather rotate my crop than turn my country into that, because I know what I'll get. Violent pests that can stand up to the pesticide, and the destruction of the beneficial, the productive, the very people that I claim to support, the very people that I claim to be willing to risk my life to defend will be the ones that suffer the most. It's so much easier to see the gift that is this republic and its freedom of movement, and to simply live somewhere like I live right here. And yes, if I had to build it all again, I would. But I chose well when I came here. I know that I can hand this property to my son and probably my grandson, and it would probably be my great-grandchildren that eventually will have to find another place. If you can lay down something for 2 generations and hand it off with strength and knowledge, you've done your part. That's all anyone can ever do. Take care, be well, rotate your crops, and rotate them often.